Good evening. My name is David Lee, and I'm the Director of Education for the Dallas Historical Society. Founded in 1922, we collect, preserve, and exhibit the heritage of Dallas and Texas to educate and inspire present and future generations. For more information about the Dallas Historical Society and upcoming programs, please visit www.dallashistory.org. Educators, please sign the attendance form in the lobby and pick up your certificate after the lecture to receive CPE credit. Welcome to an evening with Dr. Richard McCaslin. Richard B. McCaslin is the Director of Publications for the Texas State Historical Association. He is the former TSHA Professor of Texas History at the University of North Texas and has written or edited 20 books. These include Tainted Breeze, The Great Hanging at Gainesville, Texas, October 1862, which won a Tullis Award, Lee in the Shadow of Washington, which won a Laney Prize and Slatton Award and was nominated for a Pulitzer, Fighting Stock, John S. Ripford of Texas, which got a Pate Award and Bates Award, At the Heart of Texas, 100 Years of the Texas State Historical Association, 1897 to 1997, which won an Award of Merit from the Texas Philosophical Society, and Saratoga on the Cibolo, Sutherland Springs, Texas, which received a publication award from the San Antonio Conservation Society. A TSHA Fellow, he also has commendations from the Civil War Roundtables in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Shreveport for his academic work. Please join me in welcoming him to the Dallas Historical Society to discuss the life of Texas Ranger Captain William L. Wright.
He left out the coolest part, and I guess maybe I forgot to write it down. I'm an admiral in the Texas Navy. I don't have the cool hat or a boat or anything, but admiral in the Texas Navy. What we're going to talk about tonight is a book that I wrote kind of to combat the pervasive popular image of Texas Rangers as demons, Nazis, white supremacists. And if you think that's not correct, those are words that all appeared in the review for this manuscript from the University of Oklahoma Faculty Review Board, who refused to publish it. It went on to win several awards, and UNT was kind enough to publish it. But the Rangers are in that kind of a public bubble right now. My argument was that the Rangers include all kinds of folks, just as any human organization that's lasted several centuries, and they've worked hard to defend all Texans regardless of race, creed, or color. Some of them have not done that very well. Some of them have definitely stepped over the line. But among the good ones, and the reason I wrote this book partially, is William L. Wright, who worked for 40 years, 1898 to about 1939, as a ranger or a Texas sheriff. He's only about 5'8", nearsighted, you may notice from the picture, about 160 pounds. He doesn't look like your stereotypical ranger from the movies, but he is one of the big four captains of the early 20th century. The others are Frank Hamer, Tom Hickman, and Lone Wolf Gonzalez. Guess who got most of the attention? Yeah. He was also one of the first to be inducted in the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame at Waco. And he is credited with being one of the four captains who were tasked with bringing the Rangers into the 20th century, transitioning them from the Rangers of the Ranger Force to the Rangers of the Department of Public Safety like they are now. Now, where did I ever see or find Leonidas Wright, William Leonidas Wright? Well, I was working on another book at the time, Saratoga on the Cibolo. It's a history of the town of Sutherland Springs. And in there, I've stumbled across a story about Sheriff Wright, who was called up late one night by a family of a young Polish girl, she's about 15 years old, who had walked home with a knife sticking out of her chest, 15 other stab wounds, and told him who did it to her, who had also raped her, sexual assault. So Wright went out there to the house, retrieved the knife, arrested Refugio Jarek, who had done this heinous crime, fought off a lynch mob who wanted to string the guy up at the next little town down the road. Wright, along with his brother-in-law, who was also a former ranger, held him off with rifles, got him down to the courthouse. He was tried, and then he was to be hanged. And Wright made the mistake of, when he asked if his brother could come up on the gallows, Wright graciously said yes, perhaps thinking also his own brother, Milam Wright, was up there with him to kind of give him moral support. Milam was a Texas Ranger at the time. Well, as Wright afterwards stepped up to put the hood over Refugio Jurek stabbed Wright in the chest with a sharpened spoon that his brother had passed him. Wright took a moment to recover, of course, having a sharpened spoon sticking out of your chest. But he finished the hanging, which was rather a rough one, and then went off to the hospital for 3 weeks. I thought this was an interesting story. That caught my attention. And then when one of my students, who I told that story to, said, come by the house, Jody at the time, Jody Ginn, he's now one of the development officers for the Ranger Museum, I got something you need to see. And so I went by the house, and I understand y'all have met Steve Harden before. Apparently Steve Harden had dumped this on Jody, and Jody dumped into my car 3 boxes of papers and photographs and interviews that had been taped with Wright's son, Dogie Wright, who was also a Texas Ranger and then a longtime sheriff, customs officer, and border patrolman. This is Dogie. Looks a lot like Daddy, doesn't he? So it just seemed to me, as I laughingly told people for the next year, since Jody handed me a book in a box and I already had this cool hook, this is a book I ought to write. I had no idea how much I was going to be digging up. And I learned a lot about the Rangers. I learned a lot about Texas at the time, Texas jurisprudence, or lack thereof, and, of course, a lot about Wright and his family. So who is Wright? Well, like so many Texas Rangers of the 19th and 20th centuries, he is a native of Texas. He was born in Lockhart in Caldwell County, which is just east of Austin. And then immediately, since he was probably born at his granddaddy's house, his paternal granddaddy's house, he was and his family moved down to Caldwell County, moved down to Cuero in DeWitt County. I always get that mixed up. And that's where we get him on the map here. If you're wondering, here is, I'm trying not to turn away from the mic. Here's Austin. If you go down and across, we're in Cuero in DeWitt County. Probably they were moving closer to his mom's family, who were all Tumlinsons. Joseph Tumlinson lived around Cuero. He was actually the Grand Master of the Masonic Lodge and a successful businessman, and later kind of a notorious. He got caught up in some of the feuding in that area. What did Wright inherit from his daddy? Well, probably just a work ethic. His father came from Mississippi, came to Texas just before the Civil War, served in the militia during the Civil War, worked as a merchant and a justice of the peace, and he died in 1882 when young Wright was only, when young Wright was only about 14 years old. And Wright would be the oldest son. There was another one named Milam Wright. He would also serve as a ranger, but that left the weight of supporting the family on young William L. Wright, and of course he stepped up to the plate. His mama is more interesting as far as ranger history goes. Through his mother, Wright was related to, as far as I can count, 37 other Texas Rangers, including people like Creed Taylor and the founder of the Texas Rangers in 1823, which was not Stephen F. Austin. There's not enough people here to start a fight, so I can say that. Instead, she's the daughter of Joseph L. Tumlinson. Here's Mama. And we'll click over real quick. This is Joseph L. Tumlinson. He his brother John J. Tomlinson Jr., and his brother Peter Tomlinson were all captains in the Texas Rangers prior to the Civil War. Their daddy, John J. Tomlinson Sr., is the one who first wrote to the governor of Texas, the Spanish governor, of course, Tres Palacios, asking for permission to establish a ranger company in the summer of 1823. Now, he did not command that company. He passed that off to a guy named Robert Kirkpatrick. So you're looking at Wright and seeing a guy whose maternal grandfather was a captain in the Rangers along with both of his brothers. His great-grandfather is the guy who founded the Rangers, and then all kinds of scads of other Tomlinson relatives that are all through the Texas Ranger literature. Somebody might write a dissertation one time on the Tomlinson clan and their Ranger history. Give you just another example. John J. Tomlinson Sr. was actually killed by Indians in the summer of 23 on the way to San Antonio to get some more money and supplies for his ranger company that he had raised. Killed over there by Seguin. Not by Juan L. Seguin, by the town of Seguin. Very clear. Probably, though, this may have pushed all of his sons to serve in Ranger service, and his namesake, John J. Tomlinson Jr., will command the first Rangers formed in 1836 and 37 under the laws of the Republic of Texas, which is another place where they usually start Ranger history, and oh my God, there's another Tomlinson tag there. So if you're a young kid growing up, you know your granddaddy, you get to meet famous Texas Rangers like Leander McNelly, and you have this history coming down to you from your mother and your grandmother, who likes to scare you by speaking fake Kiowa, by the way. That seems to be one of her big thrills. He remembered the joy of being able to subject his own children to that later. She didn't pass away till 1908. But all of this is in your mind. You know, what am I going to do when I grow up? And it's this Tomlinson legacy that will surface so quickly. Love this image. This is in the Doge stuff. It's like, gosh, this is an awesome picture. He thinks that looks good. It's kind of like a used car salesman's outfit, isn't it? This is his 21st birthday, San Antonio. Wright will try several things as he grows up. He'll work for some of the big ranches. As a drover, he'll drive all the way up into Montana and past Colorado. He noted that it was a little too cold for him up there. He tried farming, moving over to Wilson County, Sutherland Springs, which is where Mom had settled with one of her daughters who'd married the local postmaster. He hung out there with his brothers-in-law and apparently did a lot more hunting and fishing than farming. But when he was asked one time by a reporter why he didn't stick with farming, he said, "Didn't rain enough." Well, that's a good excuse. So he's floundering, isn't he? He's not going to be a rancher. He's not really a cowboy, though he's very good at that skill set. He knows how to farm. He just doesn't much care for it. But what can he do for a living? Well, guess what? Oh, by the way, he gets married. This is where he called her Mary. By the way, her daddy was a Texas Ranger, and 3 of her brothers were Texas Rangers. So Wright just kind of adds more to the box, right? This is Wright as his next great idea. This is about the mid-1890s. He's the one on the left. He's a deputy sheriff for Wilson County. Pretty uneventful period of time, few rustlers, etc., except for one spectacular case that I think did shape a lot of the things he had in mind when he becomes sheriff himself about 6 years later. And this was the murder case involving Maximilio Martinez in 1897. Maximo is what most sources say, was in his late 30s, but he fell in love with an 18-year-old. Never mind that he was married and had 2 kids. Well, she spurned his advances. So one night he went to her grandparents' house where she lived, beat them to death with an axe, then attacked and raped and killed her. Some question as to what order of events. Then threw her half-naked body through the back window of the house into the backyard and left, where her uncle found her when he came home from a baile, a dance, at about 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe I should have warned y'all, there's some gruesome stuff in a ranger life, right? So, that has to be investigated. Wright will actually join the posse that chases Maximo down on the border, all the way almost to Laredo. Caught him out in a cactus patch barefooted. That was not going well for him. Maximo prevailed upon the kinder impulses of the judge and the sheriff and other officials in Wilson County because he decided to make his death, which he was going to be hanged for doing this, obviously, convicted and hanged, into a circus. He wanted a brass band playing. He composed his own corrido, or folk song, telling his heroic story, and he wanted that performed. There were vendors, food trucks. There was a guy out there demonstrating the new Victrola. You could buy one of those. There was a guy out there demonstrating fire extinguishers. He had this fake house built up, and they would set it on fire, and he would spray this stuff, and the fire would, this was a circus. And I'm sure young Wright, watching all this, thought, if I ever have to do this, this is not how we're going to do it. And it did turn into be a bit of a shambles, and I will note that the one time Wright had to hang anybody, Refugio Jarek, we didn't have a brass band, or a corrido being sung, or firehouse extinguisher demonstrations and food trucks. Had a little more decorum, a little more class. So Wright is doing just fine as a deputy sheriff with one moment of excitement, and then the sheriff gets voted out. Well, that's the nature of Texas politics at that time. The new sheriff gets to pick his own deputies, so Wright gets to go back to being local security for a cattle rancher. Now, these are the rules back then, and people really don't know this, but in 1871, it became illegal to carry a handgun in Texas unless you were a law enforcement officer. And the way usually to get a certificate so you could carry this handgun, I know, Marty Robbins, big iron on his hip, right? Well, he had a permit. The way to do this was to get a certificate and become a special ranger. Didn't mean you were assigned to a company or anything. Basically, you'd paid a little money, and you had gotten this certificate from Austin, and you could carry a gun, which is something you might want to do if you're cattle security out in the middle of nowhere. So Wright applies for a special ranger permit. To his great shock, other people intervened, some whispering in the ears, and suddenly he's a member of Company C, later Company E, of the Texas Rangers under John H. Rogers. Now, John H. Rogers is one of the four great captains of the last part of the 19th century. There's Rogers, Brooks, Hughes, and of course, McDonald. McDonald is the one who said, no one can stop a man who's in the right and keep on coming. One riot, one ranger, you ever heard that? That's another McDonald quip. Are you surprised if I tell you he'll eventually end up in politics? No, he's a good salesman. So, I think Wright got one of the best of the lots because Brooks is a Presbyterian stalwart who mixes a strong sense of law enforcement with a strong sense of ethics. So Wright, along with other members of, Rogers' company, will not only be trained in fast draw techniques, but also required to go to church every Sunday. Interesting mix, isn't it? But it suited Wright quite well. Alcohol was forbidden. If you drank, you were fired. Card playing, forbidden. I don't remember any of them ever dancing much. It's very much a moral situation in which he is also taught that if you're going to survive, you need to be the first guy with your gun out and you need to hit what you're aiming at. So Wright will add to his skill set here, right? He's going to go from being a guy who can handle a rope, handle a horse, all the things that a ranger would handle at that period of time, to being a little bit better with a gun. And that'll be darn good, because very quickly these rangers will be involved. I mean, within weeks of him being hired, they're going to be involved in some really bloody stuff. First was Laredo in 1899. There was a smallpox breakout. The state decided to start quarantining people and requiring inoculations, and a lot of the Mexican laborers in the town didn't understand exactly what that was about, and they had some agitators among them who told them this was they were going to be deported. You know, this is a way of just rounding you up and forcing you out of the country. So they fought back. There was a bloody shootout. Rogers lost several inches of his right humerus to a Winchester shot at close range. Wright managed to get through unscathed, but a bullet did lodge in the belt buckle of his brand new gun belt that they had bought for him. Weapon of choice at that shootout, by the way, was a 12-gauge shotgun. Good choice for a guy who's just now learning to shoot, right? Wright is a gunman. Well, he'll get that reputation at Cotulla in October 1900. This is Company E/C down at Cotulla at about that time. If you're wondering which one is Wright, look for the little guy with the squinty eyes. Right there. These are what Rangers look like in 1900, right? Not exactly what we've seen, but more accurate. There was a guy in town whose name was Jimmy Davenport. Now, Jimmy Davenport had already killed several men, had gone to jail and been let out, as was often done back then. You didn't serve long in jail. They didn't want to feed you. So Jimmy has gone to work as security for a local rancher, the Armstrong family, and he doesn't much like Rangers, specifically William L. Wright, because Wright arrested him for carrying a handgun. What did I tell you about carrying a handgun? You're not supposed to unless you have some sort of certificate, a permit, commission as a special ranger. So Wright stopped him, arrested him, made him pay a fine. So Wright is told when his boss, Rogers, leaves town that Davenport's coming for him that day. So Wright went over to the local saloon in Cotulla, put a Winchester right inside the door, had a pistol on his hip, sat in a chair out front, and waited for Davenport to show up. Of course, in due order, Davenport figured out where Wright was, and being a little under the, well, I would say 3 sheets to the wind, he approached Wright and started to provoke a fight then, but his friend, local newspaper editor, hustled Davenport off to his office, where they spent the next 3 hours apparently drinking even more. So by about 5 in the afternoon, Davenport is fully loaded in more the ways than one, heads back to the saloon. Wright meets him in the street and says, "Jimmy, don't come in here with a gun." And Jimmy said, "I got this." And Wright said, "No, you're not," and reached for Davenport's pistol. So you know how close they must have been. Davenport tried to draw. Who's been practicing? Wright. Drew first and put 5 slugs in Davenport. That'll do it. Pretty much Wright empties his pistol, right? Because 6 shooters, you left 1 chamber empty because you didn't have any safety on those things. So he's emptied his pistol. Now, of course, there was a bit of a fuss, but there's a coroner's inquest. It was a righteous kill. They argue that, Davenport shouldn't have provoked him. Davenport shouldn't have come out with an illegal weapon, and Davenport tried to draw first, all of which left Davenport with the family with no recourse. So Wright's suddenly a shootist. He's a guy that's in the newspapers. He's a badass. About that big, right? Nearsighted. Okay. But that's not going to be his way of operating. You begin to realize that Wright just seems to walk into trouble sometimes. Wright will stay with the Rangers a total of about 3.5 years. This is him with his brother and a guy named Levi Old, who was a ranger also in Rogers' company. This is them in Orange, Texas, where whitecaps had started killing black laborers, and they were sent to stop the violence, and did, even though one of the last Rangers killed before the reorganization in 1902 was killed in Orange, Texas by the whitecappers. The Rangers will also be sent, and Wright will be involved in the Reese-Townsend feud. That's an infamous feud down at Columbus, Texas. They'll be involved in keeping the peace along the docks several times. Finally, probably most famous, it'll be Wright and Rogers who chase Gregorio Cortez to ground, capture him sleeping in a sheep herder's hut down by the border. That's one of the more egregious examples of things. They will tell you that the Rangers killed Gregorio Cortez and all this. No, Gregorio Cortez had 3 different trials, protected at all times by Rangers, including William L. Wright. He will go to Huntsville, where the governor will pardon him, and then he'll go into Mexico, join the revolutionary forces, and die in the Mexican Revolution in the 19-teens, not in Texas. But Wright, of course, then just happens to be a guy hooked up in the smallpox riots, the Reese-Townsend feud, the shootout at Cotulla, the scramble over Gregorio Cortez, which becomes a very famous incident in Texas Ranger history, all of which probably was very exciting, but also very wearying, particularly when you realize that his pay did not go up a nickel in 3.5 years. He's still making $50 a month. The only way you could become better paid is to become a captain, and Texas politics wasn't going to let him be a captain. So how do you fix your income problem? You run for sheriff back in Wilson County. You quit the Rangers, you go home, you campaign, and by golly, you get elected sheriff. Wright's the one second from your left. And this is some of his ragtag deputies. Deputies didn't get paid much. The reason sheriffs could make more money is they got to keep a lot of the fees, and then they could share that with some of their deputies. And who's this fellow down here? That's the jailer. That's Luke. If you want to visit the jail, by the way, it still stands in Floresville, Texas. You can go in there. And back then, they built one building that held the prisoners and the sheriff and his family. So up front was your living quarters, and you led the bad guys in through the front door, down the front hall, and into a receiving room, and then locked them in the cells in the back. So yeah, if they escaped, they would probably be in your front parlor, which happened every now and then. So Wright is now a sheriff in a small rural community in a rural county in Texas. Now you probably have this image of Andy Griffith and Barney Fife. No, he wishes. Rogers sent Wright a telegram. Congratulations. Make the people a ranger, sheriff. Act impartially without regard to nationality, color, or wealth. Wright folded that up, carried it in his pocket for years, and it still survives in the family archives. What's Rogers talking about? Okay, he's going to be 15 years as sheriff, right? During that time, he'll send 53 men to Huntsville. 53 in 15 years. That's the ones that went for everything from rape to murder. That's the violent crimes. You didn't go to Huntsville for stealing a horse or a pig. If you robbed a bank and they caught you, they would do that. So violent crimes, including murder, rape, and attempted murder or rape, are a lot of what Wright was dealing with. And some fantastic stuff that just doesn't make the stats. There was a man who walked out to his breakfast table one morning with a shotgun, sat down, blew away his son and his daughter-in-law, and then summoned the Mexican laborer, told him to go get the people next door because he was going to blow his own head off, and he did. We don't think of that in our bucolic image of late 19th, early 20th century. But there was a lot of violent crime. And Wright grew a reputation as a guy who could handle this. And by 1915, he is the president of the Texas Sheriff's Association. Now, he still doesn't really like the spotlight. When he was elected, you're supposed to give a talk. He brought his local minister to give the talk for him and sat in the back, real quiet. So how's he going to get back in the Rangers? He left because of politics, right? He's been a sheriff for 15 years, longer than anybody else in Wilson County history up to that time. But we have our border troubles, right? The bandit war. We have Porvenir. We have other questions being raised about the Rangers and the violence along the border, which Wright was only marginally involved in, and I talk about that in the book. By late 1917, we got to get rid of Ferguson, so we impeach him and yank him out of office as governor. And the new governor, Bill Hobby, Sr., reorganizes the Rangers and contacts Wright and says, how would you like to be a captain? And captain, think about it. This guy's the president of the Sheriff's Association of Texas. He's a natural choice, isn't he? And so Wright was very excited. He happily took the assignment, and he will actually ask to be posted to Marfa, Texas, because that's where J. Monroe Fox is captain. And Wright says, if you don't send me to Marfa and get Monroe Fox out of there, something horrible is going to happen. And the state, with a lot of letters from rich ranchers, didn't take J. Monroe Fox out of Marfa, sent Wright down to Brownsville, and Monroe Fox's boys commit the Porvenir massacre. Wright knew, he understood, he tried to stop it, but they weren't listening to him. So Wright comes back to service to Brownsville. This is Company K. This is the company that he'll command from about 1917, December, through about 1921. This is Wright up top with his chuck wagon rig. That's his cousin up there driving it, Wright C. Wells. Eads is a guy who's been working with him forever as a deputy sheriff. He'll be the center of a lot of investigation when the Canales investigation goes off. And I love it because a lot of the books about Rangers talk about this evil Anglo, John Eads, and the terrible things he did and how he was the focus of the investigation. John Eads' mama is a Canary Islander from San Antonio. He would have told you, I am not Anglo, I am Spanish. Nor did he think he was Mexican. Eads, interesting fellow. But Wright will bring him along. This is Company K at Laredo. This is what a company of Texas Rangers looked like in 1918. There'll be about 5 of these companies. That's all told how many Rangers there were at the time. Wright, he's resplendent in this rig. This is what he looked like as he's leaving Sutherland Springs, Wilson County, and heading off to be a Ranger captain for the first time. This is Jack. The horse's name is Jack. He was given to him by the people of Sutherland Springs in gratitude for the years of service. Jack is a genuine steel duster. Y'all know what that is? The very first quarter horse ever was steel dust. He was brought to Texas before the Civil War. All quarter horses descend from steel dust. And that means William L. Wright there is mounted on a genuine great-great-grandson of the first ever quarter horse. Cool horse, right? It's almost like having like a 59 Chevy or a 69 Camaro. He's got pearl-handled revolvers. Those have been given to him by the people of Wilson County in 1910 in gratitude for the first 8 years of service. And also, hopefully, that he wouldn't quit being their sheriff. So if they give him some cool guns, he'll stick around. Those are silver dollar rowels made by a Mexican jeweler. I mean, he has it all. But he's still a nearsighted little dude, about 5'8" or 9. Wearing a good rig, though. He's also he's also got in this carbine jacket here what's called a Tumlinson carbine, named for one of his cousins. He has discovered that in the brush of South Texas, you don't need no Thompson submachine gun. In fact, he'll decline the issue of that to his company, 2 of them. You don't need a shotgun. What you need is a good Winchester cut down to about 18 inches long. You can sweep it around the brush, it'll punch through, and it'll pretty much take down your target. So he was famous for carrying, and a lot of his men carry what we call Tomlinson carbines. If you ever run across that, want to amaze your friends and dazzle your enemies at cocktail parties, you can tell them, you know what a Tomlinson carbine is. Or if you're, you know, in more genteel company, tell them you know what a steel duster is. They'll be really impressed. You realize it wasn't until 1941 that they mandated that you had to call quarter horses quarter horses? The American Quarter Horse Association organized in 41. And until that time, a lot of your old great-great-granddaddies called these steel dusters because they all came from steel dust. See, you're going to learn all kinds of useless information here, despite yourselves and despite me. So down to Brownsville he goes, and here we are. We're starting to dismantle other myths that we have. By the way, Wright had black deputies. We already met Luke. One thing they like to talk about, and they all throw a hissy fit over at Waco, is all these folks will come in and say, my granddaddy was the first Hispanic ranger. He joined the force in 1975. All right. This is Wright's company at Brownsville in 1920. About 6 Hispanics. Think about it, guys. If you're posted in Brownsville, you might want to have some folks who speak Spanish and know the area and the families and what's going on, right? You're not stupid, so you hire up. In fact, the guy over here sitting right next to him is the former sheriff of Starr County. So Wright is another one of those that I say, well, here's 6 Hispanics in his company in 1920, not 1975. And the fact is, Hispanics have served in the Texas Rangers all the way from the period of the Republic. They've always been there. So, moving right along and getting off my soapbox. This is going to be an interesting period of history. Wright will command 40 men between 1918 and 1925. We'll roll Company D in with Company K. 40 guys. A lot of famous names like Hamer, not Frank, his brother Harrison. He'll never lose a man. He will never be accused of abuse. And he will become a star witness at the Canales investigation in 1919, one of the few people that Canales trusted to tell the truth about what was going on in the border. Sitting next to him in his testimony, though, was who? John Rogers, the guy who taught him to be truthful and to be honest and ethical, and also shoot straight and faster than the other guy. So Wright gets to work down in Brownsville. The world has changed. Prohibition. What are they chasing on the border? Tequileros, liquor smugglers. By the way, this is when America discovered tequila. We shut down all the bourbon dispensaries, right? And all the gin makers couldn't get that, in my opinion, nasty Canadian whiskey. So this is when we discovered we kind of like tequila. Started thinking of new drinks. It was cheap. We could bring it up across the border, and it was Wright's job to stop it. Not much fun. He was almost killed in 1919 in Brownsville. Time number 3, right? He was walking out of the post office. Now you'll notice what they're wearing. When they were in town, Wright instructed his people to dress nicely, suit and tie, keep your badge concealed, keep any weapons concealed, don't pick fights. You know, this is not what we're here for. So Wright comes out of the post office, and 2 soldiers run up to him and say, there's a drunk guy over there throwing empty liquor bottles at cars going by. They knew who Wright was, so would you go tell him to stop? So Wright goes over there and tells the fellow to stop. Rather than stop, the guy pulls out a knife and stabs Wright in the chest. Fortunately, Wright was carrying his tobacco, yes, he was a smoker, in a tin right there. Guess what the guy hit? The tin box. Bank. So Wright pulls his pistol and, you know, shoot him in the leg, right? So Wright shot him in the leg. Jose Corona got off, and by the way, he's on Find a Grave if you want to go read some of this. Got up off the sidewalk and came at Wright again with the knife, and Wright shot him and took him out. Another inquest, well, what choices did you have? If you weren't wearing a tobacco tin in your pocket, you'd be dead already. So Wright will then turn to the job of chasing liquor smugglers. And he and Company D, this is how they dressed out in the field. And by the way, this kid on the far right here, oops, come on. That fellow right there, that's William L. Wright, Jr. He served as a ranger under his dad for about a year, year and a half. So out they go. And no company took more liquor, arrested more tequileros than Company D. About 25,000 bottles of tequila. This is a 3,000 bottle batch they caught in November 8, 1921. So there were a lot of heavy drinkers and heavy partiers who did not like William L. Wright and started calling him El Diablo Capitano, the devil captain. There was a shootout once or twice. Sometimes the smugglers wanted to try and get away rather than succumb to being arrested. And Wright always managed to come out on the surviving side of those fights. They also had the job of monitoring railroad violence. 1922, a huge national railroad strike. This is the entire Ranger force, minus 4 or 5, all called into Denison, Texas, and then scattered up and down the railroads in Texas to try and keep the peace, which included keeping strikers from beating strike breakers to death. Pretty dangerous work. By October 1922, the strike is over, so Wright is told he can go back to Brownsville, which is where he'd much rather be. But he's interrupted on his trip south. His investigative skills have become more sharp, and so he's sent over to Corpus Christi to join Frank Hamer, the guy who took out Bonnie and Clyde, in an investigation of the killing of a local Ku Klux Klan leader named Fred Roberts. Fred had actually come close to winning the local elections, so the local sheriff walked over to Fred's car and shot him 3 times. That's one way to stop the problem, isn't it? By the way, the sheriff will be acquitted. He'll say he mistakenly thought Fred was reaching for a gun. Yeah, right. If you're reaching to shake a man's hand through your car window, where's your hand going to go? Wright and Hamer will be called in to investigate. And again, this is an excellent example of being a frustrated Texas Ranger law enforcement officer. They had all witnesses, they had all the evidence, they had the dead body with the bullets in it. No conviction. Guy just walks. That's got to be frustrating over and over and over. By the way, think about that when you go down to Corpus Christi anytime in the next few years. There's a Fred Roberts Hospital right there, and I bet they have no idea who Fred Roberts was or what happened to him. And that's what historians like to do, right? We like to ruin people's day by saying, do you know who that is? He was a KKK guy, got shot in his own car. Okay. Children's Hospital, huh? Okay. So he's pretty busy. Wright will go on back down to the border. Things will be rolling right along, and then we get politics again. Ma Ferguson took office in 1925, determined to vindicate her husband and make a buttload of money doing it. That means the Rangers are a problem because they don't like her husband and they don't like corruption. So she fired pretty much the entire Ranger force, except for a few of them who quit before they could be fired. Wright was in the I quit, you can't fire me. So Wright in 1925 quit his dream job. After a little over 7 years, he walked away. An article from the San Antonio Express called him the Dean of Texas Rangers and quipped, "He has the satisfaction of quitting the service with a clean record of duty, efficiently performed, frequently when life was hanging in the balance." Others were more colorful, and that's where the El Capitan Diablo comes. We need an El Capitan Diablo back on the border. So what does Wright do? He becomes a Robstown deputy. That's outside of Corpus Christi, working for an old friend. First guy he busted was a guy trying to smuggle a box of 4 bottles of wine into town. Instinct, right? But in 1927, a new governor, Dan Moody, was elected on a Let's Clean Up Texas campaign, which includes Keep Ma Ferguson and her people out. And he brought in several old-timer captains, Wright being one of them, to restore order. Wright would be 59 years old at this time. He's on the far left in this photograph. Quote, for this is a Cotulla newspaper, "He's looking fit as a fiddle and stepping about according to his old form." It's kind of funny, he just got out from having surgery at the local hospital 3 weeks before they wrote that. So, back goes Wright, except now we're not chasing liquor smugglers. He'll do a little bit of that, a little bit of cattle smuggling, but mostly he'll be sent out to deal with oil boom towns, specifically Wink, Texas. Wink was quite a place. When he got there, he discovered that the mayor was in cahoots with a criminal ring that had been chased out of Borger, led by some colorful characters like Two-Gun Dick Herwig. The chief of police was involved with them, but that got solved pretty quickly because somebody murdered the chief of police in his own jail. But then Wright had to arrest the guy's replacement because he found out that the mayor had hired an escaped murderer from the Oklahoma State Penitentiary to be the new chief of police. You can imagine, and about this point is when a federal judge stepped in unincorporated Wink, Texas. They had narcotics, but Wright is there to clean it up. He'll arrest several hundred men over the next couple of years. And things calm down a bit. Oil moves on to the next town. And Wright's probably looking at a quiet, make it through his 60s, when suddenly, guess what we do? We elect Ma Ferguson governor again, and she fires him. She fired all of them but one, all the Texas Rangers. What does he do? He goes back down to his buddy at Robstown, becomes a local kind of a patrol officer, basically. But in 1935, another cleanup governor, Jimmy Allred, takes office, declares he's going to reorganize law enforcement in Texas, and this is the creation of the Department of Public Safety. On a blueprint drawn up by a Chicago investigating and reorganization kind of a management firm, they decided to bring all Texas law enforcement, or almost all, under the DPS. So the Rangers then become a subheading of the DPS, just like the Highway Patrol and a few other smaller agencies. So Wright suddenly finds himself working for the DPS now. He worked for the Frontier Battalion in 1899. He worked for the Ranger Force from 18 to 25, and again until from 27 to 33. Now he's a DPS officer. He's also approaching 70 years old. But they will send him to deal with longshoreman strikes, pinball machines, gambling infractions, bootleggers, escaped prisoners. He'll chase one all the way to New York City and another one to Washington State. He's learning his investigative skills. He caught him, brought him back. He does get to do a few cool things. If you're this old and you've been a ranger this long, they ask you to do a few cool things, like bringing you over to the Centennial here, right? And you're kind of the eye candy for the new Roy Rogers movie and the new Texas Rangers movie they put out. They brought Wright in, put him up at the big old Baker Hotel, gave him the key to the city. He got to go to fancy banquets with pretty ladies, which I'm sure just thrilled the wife. The only thing he grumbled about was they didn't let him keep the key to the city. He didn't understand that they were going to take it back at the end of the evening. Kind of tacky, wasn't it? But he got to meet Roy Rogers, and he got to meet a lot of celebrities, and he really did have a good time. And who's this? This is one of the other great captains. This is Hughes, his John Rogers' old running buddy. So he gets to be a celebrity. And then the boom falls. Passed the biscuits, Pappy. William Lee O'Daniel became governor on a let's cut the budget program. And so Wright gets put out of the Rangers. By this time, if you count up, he is 71 years old. But he is also the only Ranger allowed to wear a mustache at that time. Are you going to tell him he can't have it? He's been around a long time. So this is Wright retired down in Corpus Christi. He gets to do some cool things. There's a wonderful picture I could show you of him chatting with LBJ, which is funny because like LBJ's way up here and Wright's leaning back like this talking to him. But Wright's giving him, you can tell he's giving him all kinds of good advice, and LBJ's listening. But he'll die in the spring of 42. And what his longtime doctor wrote on his death certificate is he died of a broken heart. His son was a member of the Lost Battalion that had been captured on Bataan and taken over the death march in Burma. By the way, the son will survive. He will come home at 115 pounds and go on to be a chief executive for Exxon Corporation. The old spirit of the Wrights, it's strong. But he didn't know what had happened to his son. There'll be no news of his son for 2 or 3 years. Really, he had a lot of things wrong with him, a lot of complications, but the doctor believed that he just gave up from a broken heart. It'll be many years before people actually commemorate Wright's service. In the late 60s, they started putting together that Hall of Fame. He was one of the first 20, there was a class of 20 put in there. That sparked commemoration efforts back in Floresville, where he had lived for so long while he was a sheriff and before and after. So they put up monuments. There's a marker at his grave. This marker up here on the upper left is on the courthouse square. That's his granddaughter putting a wreath of flowers on it in 1967. So he's in the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame. There's a monument to him in Floresville, just a few dozen yards away from the old jail that still stands that he ran for almost 16 years. More importantly, he started getting some notice from people who write history, who write Ranger history. If you look up the website for Texas State Library and Archives, it will tell you that Wright is one of the 3 captains who restored the Rangers' reputation in the 1920s, him, Hamer, and Gonzalez. The Handbook of Texas online has the big 4, Wright, Hamer, Hicks, and Gonzalez. And I got to add to the pile by writing a book about Wright. There's already a book about Hamer. Lone Wolf Gonzalez, of course, got the first book because he went off and made movies in Hollywood, and of course he's going to get the first book. But Hamer, of course, has a fantastic book by Bosenecker. And then I thought, well, let's just add to the pile. And now Wright has his own biography.